The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Keanu's home as he scrolled through his emails on his phone. His assistant had forwarded him an invitation that made him pause. Jimmy Kimmel's show wanted him as a guest next week to talk about his new movie. Keanu sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. He wasn't always comfortable with talk shows, preferring to let his work speak for itself. "They're really pushing for this one," his publicist Tom said over the phone. "The movie opens in 3 weeks, and this kind of visibility could really help the box office." Keanu walked to his kitchen window, looking out at the garden. I know. It's just," he trailed off, remembering his last talk show appearance where the host had tried to dig into his personal life. Jimmy's team promised they'd focus on the movie and your charity work. Tom added, sensing Keanu's hesitation. "No personal questions about your relationships or past tragedies." Keanu nodded to himself. Those were his usual boundaries, and they seemed reasonable enough. "All right," he finally agreed. "Set it up." The week flew by quickly. On the day of the show, Keanu arrived at the studio 2 hours early as requested. A production assistant with bright blue hair greeted him enthusiastically, leading him through the maze of corridors. "We're so excited to have you on the show," she chatted as they walked. "Everyone's been talking about it all week." Keanu smiled politely, noticing how the usual relaxed atmosphere of a television studio seemed different today. Staff members whispered to each other, casting quick glances his way. In the green room, a makeup artist lightly powdered his face while another staff member went through the planned segments. "So after Jimmy introduces you, he'll mention your new movie, then ask about the stunt work you did personally," the segment producer explained, not quite meeting Keanu's eyes. "After that, we thought it would be fun to surprise you with some fan questions we've collected." Keanu raised an eyebrow. Surprise questions weren't mentioned before. "Can I know what they're about?" The producer shuffled his papers. "Just light-hearted stuff, nothing to worry about." Before Keanu could press further, the door opened and Jimmy himself popped in. "The man of the hour," he announced with his trademark grin, but Keanu noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. They shook hands, exchanging pleasantries, but something felt off about the brief interaction. Jimmy seemed distracted, almost nervous. "Looking forward to the interview," Jimmy said, backing toward the door. "Got some really interesting things to talk about." After Jimmy left, Keanu turned to his personal assistant who had traveled with him. "Does something feel strange to you?" he asked quietly. She nodded. The production assistants keep whispering. "I overheard someone mention ratings and controversial questions." Keanu frowned. He'd been in this business long enough to know when something wasn't right. He called Tom, his publicist, explaining his concerns. "Let me call the show's producer," Tom promised. "We had a clear agreement about topics." Minutes later, as Keanu was reviewing notes about his charity work, Tom called back. "They're being evasive," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Something about a last-minute segment change approved by higher-ups." Keanu felt his stomach tighten. Years of experience told him this might not go as planned. Still, walking out now would create its own headlines and problems for the movie promotion. 15 minutes, a staff member called, poking her head into the room. Keanu took a deep breath. Whatever was coming, he would handle it with the same calm dignity he brought to everything else in his life. As Keanu sat in the green room, a subtle tension hung in the air. The production assistants scurried around with an unusual nervousness, checking their watches every few minutes. Through the thin walls, he could hear the audience being warmed up, their laughter sounding distant and muffled. 5 minutes, called out a crew member with a clipboard, not quite meeting Keanu's eyes. Keanu's personal assistant leaned over. "I don't like this," she whispered. "I overheard 2 writers arguing about some questions they added last minute." "What kind of questions?" Keanu asked, straightening his simple black blazer. She shook her head. "They lowered their voices when they saw me." A knock on the door interrupted them. Jimmy Kimmel himself stepped in, his usual confident demeanor slightly off. "Hey, great to have you here," Jimmy said, offering a handshake that seemed a bit too firm, a bit too quick. "Big fan of your work." "Thanks for having me," Keanu replied, watching Jimmy's face carefully. "Looking forward to talking about the new film." Jimmy nodded, a flash of something, guilt, crossing his face. "Yeah, absolutely. And a few other things the audience is curious about." Keanu tilted his head. Like what? Jimmy glanced at his producer hovering by the door. Just, some current events. Things people are talking about. He backed toward the door. See you out there. After Jimmy left, Keanu turned to his assistant. Call Tom again. Something's definitely off. While she stepped outside to make the call, a makeup artist rushed in for final touches. You look worried, she said, dabbing powder on his forehead. Should I be? Keanu asked. The makeup artist hesitated, brush midair. I'm not supposed to say anything, but she lowered her voice. The network executives pushed for some controversial questions. They're chasing ratings. Jimmy wasn't happy about it. Keanu felt his jaw tighten. He'd been in Hollywood long enough to know what that meant. Someone wanted a viral moment at his expense. His assistant returned, phone still in hand. Tom says the producer had admitted they added questions about your past relationships and about the tragedies in your life. Keanu closed his eyes briefly. These were exactly the topics he had explicitly asked to avoid. The painful losses he'd experienced weren't fodder for entertainment. We can leave, his assistant suggested. Just say the word. Keanu considered it. Walking out would create headlines, but staying might be worse. He thought about the film crew, the hundreds of people who had worked hard on the movie he was supposed to be promoting. They deserved better than for him to abandon the promotional tour. No, he finally said. I'll go out there, but I won't discuss those topics. A production assistant appeared at the door. They're ready for you, Mr. Reeves. Walking through the backstage area, Keanu noticed how staff members avoided eye contact. As he approached the edge of the set, he could hear Jimmy's monologue winding down, the audience laughing at jokes about recent news. Our next guest is one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood, Jimmy was saying. You know him from The Matrix and John Wick, and he's here tonight to talk about his new film. Keanu took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Whatever was coming, he would face it with dignity. As the audience applauded, he stepped out onto the brightly lit stage, waving with a smile that masked his inner caution. Jimmy stood to greet him, the cameras capturing their handshake for millions to see. The conversation was about to begin, and Keanu could tell it wasn't going to go as planned. The bright studio lights felt warm on Keanu's face as he settled into the guest chair. The audience's applause gradually died down, leaving that moment of expectant silence before the conversation began. Jimmy sat across from him, shuffling his cue cards with an unusual nervousness. So, Keanu, Jimmy began with his trademark grin. Thanks for being here tonight. It's been a while since we've seen you on a talk show. Keanu nodded, his posture relaxed despite his inner caution. Good to be here, Jimmy. Been busy filming and working on a few projects. And one of those projects is your new movie, Shadow's Edge, which looks incredible. Jimmy held up a poster of the film, and the audience cheered. You're known for doing many of your own stunts. Was there anything particularly challenging about this one? This was safe territory. Keanu leaned forward, his passion for the craft evident as he spoke. We had this one sequence filmed in the mountains during a snowstorm. Real conditions, real snow. The stunt team built this incredible rig that let me. Was that scarier than the motorcycle scene in your last film? Jimmy cut in, keeping the conversation flowing. Different kind of challenge, Keanu explained, warming to the topic. With motorcycles, it's about precision. With the mountain scene, we were battling the elements. 20 below zero some days. The audience murmured appreciatively. A woman in the front row called out, "We love you, Keanu," causing a ripple of agreeing cheers. Keanu smiled and waved in acknowledgement, his genuine humility shining through. For a moment, it seemed like the interview might stick to the planned topics after all. I heard you also donated part of your salary to the stunt crew, Jimmy said, referencing a story that had made the rounds online. Keanu looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise. They're the ones taking the real risks. They deserve recognition. The audience applauded warmly. This was the Keanu they knew and loved, kind, generous, down to earth. Jimmy nodded, then glanced down at his cards. His expression shifted subtly. Speaking of recognition, I wanted to talk about something else people recognize about you. Keanu's assistant, watching from the wings, straightened up. This was the turn they'd been warned about. You've become known for being, well, the internet's favorite person, Jimmy continued. There are all these stories about your kindness, giving up your seat on the subway, helping stranded passengers when a flight was delayed. People are generally good, Keanu deflected humbly. I just try to treat others with respect. But there's something different about you, Jimmy pressed. You've gone through some really tough times in your life, yet you've maintained this positive outlook. How do you? Keanu's expression remained pleasant, but something changed in his eyes. The movie has some great moments of resilience too. My character loses everything and has to rebuild. It was a gentle redirection, but Jimmy didn't take the hint. He leaned forward. But in real life, you've experienced more tragedy than most people could handle. The loss of your daughter, your girlfriend's passing. The audience's mood shifted instantly. A collective intake of breath followed by uncomfortable silence. These were the sacred, painful parts of Keanu's life that he never discussed publicly. For a moment, Keanu said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy with tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I'd prefer to focus on the work, Jimmy. The film has a lot to offer audiences. Jimmy looked torn, glancing off stage where a producer was making urgent gestures. Of course, but many people find your journey inspiring. How you've handled grief. Everyone handles grief in their own way, Keanu said, his kindness somehow making the boundary even clearer. And for me, that's privately. The audience broke into supportive applause, many clearly uncomfortable with Jimmy's line of questioning. Jimmy shifted in his seat, clearly caught between network pressure and respect for his guest. Let's talk about your charity work then, he offered, but his tone suggested this was just a temporary detour. Keanu could sense that Jimmy wasn't done yet. This interview was just beginning to veer off course. The moment Jimmy mentioned charity work, a subtle shift happened in the studio. The audience, still uncomfortable from the previous exchange, seemed to relax slightly. Keanu nodded, apparently willing to discuss this safer topic, though wariness remained in his eyes. Your foundation has helped kids with cancer for years now, Jimmy said, his tone softening. That must be rewarding work. It's important work, Keanu replied, his voice genuine. Those kids and their families face real challenges with incredible strength. They're the ones who inspire me. A warm ripple of applause spread through the audience. This was the conversation they had hoped to see. Jimmy smiled, seeming relieved at the positive turn. But then he glanced down at his notes again, and something in his expression changed. You know, speaking of inspiration, Jimmy began, his tone shifting. People often wonder what drives your generosity. I've heard that your experiences with loss have shaped how you view wealth and fame. Keanu's face remained calm, but those who knew him well would have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. The audience grew quiet, sensing the tension returning. I believe we all have responsibilities to each other, Keanu answered carefully. My views on that are pretty simple. Jimmy nodded, then pushed further. But there was a turning point for you, wasn't there? After what happened with. I think there are turning points in everyone's lives, Keanu interrupted gently but firmly. The movie we're discussing explores that theme, actually. My character reaches a moment where he has to decide who he wants to be. A few audience members clapped, supporting Keanu's redirect. But Jimmy, clearly under pressure from producers, pressed on. The internet has these theories about why you often look sad in photos, Jimmy said as a staff member brought him a tablet. He turned it to show Keanu. This meme of you eating a sandwich alone on a park bench went viral and... That was just lunch on a normal day, Keanu said with a hint of a smile, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. Everyone eats lunch. The audience laughed, breaking some of the tension, but Jimmy wasn't letting go. But people connect it to this narrative about your life. The tragedy, the losses. They call you sad, Keanu, because... I'd rather talk about the film, Keanu said, his voice still kind but with an edge of finality. Or the charity work you mentioned. Those are things that matter. Jimmy glanced off stage, where a producer was making a slashing motion across his throat, a signal to drop this line of questioning, while another producer was urgently pointing at different cue cards, seemingly encouraging Jimmy to continue. The conflict played out on Jimmy's face for a moment before he appeared to make a decision. You know, the studio really wants me to ask about the personal stuff, Jimmy admitted, suddenly breaking character. But I respect your boundaries. Let's get back to the film. A murmur of surprise ran through the audience. This kind of behind-the-curtain moment was rare on live television. For a brief moment, Keanu looked grateful, nodding at Jimmy with genuine appreciation. The film has this incredible underwater sequence, Jimmy continued, visibly more comfortable. How long did you have to train for that? 2 months of free diving practice, Keanu began, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. The longest take was nearly 3 minutes underwater, which... Suddenly, Jimmy's earpiece seemed to come alive. His expression changed mid-sentence as he listened to someone speaking in his ear. The audience watched as Jimmy's face fell, then hardened. "I'm sorry," Jimmy said, interrupting Keanu. "I've just been told by the network that we need to address the rumors about your private life before we continue. They're insisting." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Keanu went completely still, his expression unreadable. This was the turning point, the moment where everything was about to change. A deathly silence fell over the studio. Keanu's expression remained calm, but something changed in his eyes, a hardening, a moment of decision. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, many exchanging worried glances. This wasn't the light entertainment they had come for. "Jimmy," Keanu said quietly, "I've always been clear about certain boundaries." His voice was soft but carried throughout the silent studio. "My personal life, especially regarding loss, isn't something I discuss publicly." Jimmy looked genuinely conflicted, caught between his network bosses and his own sense of decency. "I understand that, and personally, I respect it completely. But the network is pushing." "Then let me be very clear," Keanu interrupted, his voice still even but firm. "I'm here to discuss my professional work, my charity efforts. The film that hundreds of talented people worked on, not my personal tragedies." A wave of supportive applause rippled through the audience. Someone near the back shouted, "We love you, Keanu," sparking more applause. Jimmy glanced offstage where two producers were now having what appeared to be a heated argument. One was making slashing motions while the other was pointing angrily at a tablet. "Look," Jimmy said, dropping the TV host persona entirely, "I think this is wrong. I didn't want to go this route." He touched his earpiece. "Yes, I know what you're saying, but..." He winced at whatever was being said to him. Keanu leaned forward. "Jimmy, I respect you've got a job to do. But so do I, and part of my job is protecting the parts of my life that are private." "They're saying the segment won't work without the personal angle," Jimmy admitted. "They're talking ratings, viral clips." Keanu nodded slowly, understanding the pressure Jimmy was under. "Then perhaps we should end the segment." A collective gasp went through the audience. This kind of confrontation almost never happened on live television. "Can we take a quick break?" Jimmy asked, looking directly at the camera. Without waiting for a response from the control room, he turned back to Keanu. "Look, let me see if I can fix this during the commercial." "I appreciate that," Keanu said. "And we'll be right back after these messages," Jimmy announced to the camera, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The moment the on-air light went off, the set erupted in activity. Jimmy's producer rushed onto the stage, along with Keanu's assistant. Two network executives in suits appeared from the wings, their faces tight with anger. "You can't just cut to commercial without warning," one executive said to Jimmy. "And you can't force my guest to discuss personal tragedies for ratings," Jimmy shut back, standing up. "That wasn't our agreement." Keanu remained seated, watching the chaos unfold with remarkable composure. "Mr. Reeves," the second executive said, turning to him, "surely you understand the nature of promotion. The audience wants the human interest angle." "The audience," Keanu replied calmly, "seems perfectly happy with the professional discussion we were having." He nodded toward the audience, many of whom were watching the off-air confrontation with wide eyes. 3 minutes to air, a stagehand called out. Jimmy's producer and the network executives huddled in urgent conversation, their whispers becoming more heated by the second. "We stick to the original agreement or I'm walking," Jimmy insisted, loud enough for Keanu to hear. "It's your show, but it's our network," one executive replied coldly. Jimmy looked over at Keanu apologetically. "I'm trying, but they're insisting on the personal questions." Keanu nodded, standing up slowly. He removed his microphone with careful, deliberate movements. "Then I think we're done here." The audience, sensing what was happening, began to murmur in disbelief. Some people stood up, calling out words of support for Keanu. 30 seconds to air, the stagehand announced nervously. The The studio had become a standoff, with Jimmy and Keanu on one side, the network executives on the other, and the audience as unwitting witnesses to the power struggle unfolding before them. The tension in the studio was palpable as the countdown to returning on air continued. Keanu stood calmly, microphone already removed, while chaos erupted around him. His personal assistant rushed to his side, carrying his jacket. 10 seconds to air. The stagehand called, panic evident in his voice. The network executives moved between Keanu and the exit, not physically blocking him, but making their presence known. "Mr. Reeves, please reconsider," one of them said urgently. "We can work something out." "There's nothing to work out," Keanu replied, his voice level but firm. "My boundaries were clear from the beginning." Jimmy stood up, removing his own microphone in a show of solidarity that sent ripples of surprise through the crew. "If Keanu walks, I walk too." "You can't do that," the second executive hissed. "Your contract." 5 seconds, the stagehand shouted. Jimmy looked directly at the cameraman. "Cut the feed. We're not doing this." The cameraman hesitated, looking between Jimmy and the producers. In the control room, frantic voices could be heard arguing over what to do. "Roll the commercials," someone finally ordered through the studio speakers. "Keep the commercials running." The on-air light remained off. The audience had gone from confused to fully invested in the drama unfolding before them. Many had their phones out, recording everything despite the "no game" signs posted throughout the studio. "This is completely unprofessional," the first executive said, turning to Keanu. "We had an understanding about this appearance." "Yes, we did," Keanu agreed calmly. "And that understanding included respecting certain boundaries which were just crossed." The head producer stepped between them, trying to defuse the situation. "Let's everyone take a breath. We can salvage this. Maybe a compromise." "There's no compromise on basic respect," Keanu said simply. His words weren't angry, but they carried weight that silenced the room momentarily. Jimmy approached Keanu, ignoring the executives. "I'm really sorry about this. This isn't how I wanted things to go." Keanu nodded, offering a small smile. "I know. It's not your fault." "The hell it isn't," one of the executives cut in. "Jimmy, get back on that stage now or what?" Jimmy challenged, years of frustration suddenly visible on his face. "You'll fire me? Go ahead. I'm not ambushing my guests for ratings." The audience broke into spontaneous applause at Jimmy's words. Someone started a chant of "Keanu, Keanu" that quickly spread through the crowd. Security personnel appeared at the studio entrances, unsure of what they were supposed to be doing. Keanu's bodyguard, who had been waiting discreetly offstage, moved closer to him. "We need to shut this down now," the head producer decided, seeing the situation spiraling. "Clear the audience. We'll say there was a technical difficulty." "Technical difficulty," Jimmy repeated incredulously. "The only difficulty here is the network trying to exploit someone's personal tragedy for views." As staff began reluctantly approaching the audience to ask them to leave, Keanu touched Jimmy's shoulder. "Thank you for standing up. Not many would have." Jimmy shook his head. "I should have done it sooner. I knew where this was heading." The studio had descended into complete chaos. Half the audience was refusing to leave, security was arguing with producers, and a group of crew members had gathered around Jimmy and Keanu in a protective circle. Through it all, Keanu maintained that same centered calm that had made him beloved by fans worldwide. He surveyed the scene, then turned to his assistant. "I think it's time to go." Making his way toward the exit, Keanu stopped briefly to address the nearest camera operator. "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. I hope it doesn't cause problems for you." The genuine concern, even in the midst of his own difficult situation, was exactly why people admired him. As Keanu neared the exit, followed by his team, one of the executives made a last desperate attempt. "The network can issue a public apology if you'll just finish the segment." Keanu paused, considering this for a moment before shaking his head. Sometimes the best response is simply walking away. With those words, he stepped through the door, leaving behind a studio in disarray and an interview that would soon become legendary for reasons nobody had anticipated. The morning after the chaotic show, news of Keanu's walkout spread like wildfire. Every entertainment website, morning show, and social media platform buzzed with different versions of what happened. Video clips taken by audience members, despite the studio's no recording policy, had already gone viral overnight. Keanu woke up to dozens of missed calls from his agent, publicist, and even studio executives behind his upcoming film. Rolling over in bed, he sighed deeply before finally picking up his phone. The notifications were overwhelming. Supportive messages from friends and colleagues, news alerts mentioning his name, and trending hashtags like #KeanuDeservesBetter and #RespectPrivacy. His publicist Tom called just as Keanu was making his morning coffee. "How are you holding up?" Tom asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'm fine," Keanu replied simply. "How bad is it?" "Actually, it's not bad at all. Not for you anyway," Tom explained. "The audience videos tell the whole story. You're getting massive support online. People are praising you for standing your ground. The network, though, they're in damage control mode." Across town, Jimmy Kimmel sat in an emergency meeting with network executives, his arms crossed defiantly as they discussed the fallout. "The numbers are terrible," one executive admitted reluctantly. "Viewers are threatening to boycott not just the show, but all network programming. We're getting flooded with messages supporting both Keanu and Jimmy." Jimmy's longtime producer stood up. "I told you this was a bad idea from the start. We've spent years building trust with our guests. We can't throw that away for one viral moment." Meanwhile, outside the network building, a small group of fans had gathered with handmade signs supporting both Keanu and Jimmy. Local news crews interviewed them, spreading the story further. "He's always been so private about his losses," one fan explained to a reporter. "Everyone knows what he's been through, but he doesn't use it for publicity. That's why people respect him." By midday, the network released their first official statement. They expressed regret over the miscommunication and claimed they had the utmost respect for Mr. Reeves' privacy. The carefully worded statement avoided directly acknowledging wrongdoing or offering a genuine apology. The response online was swift and merciless. Comments flooded in calling the statement corporate nonsense and damage control without accountability. Keanu spent the day at home, ignoring the media circus. His agent called with surprising news. "You won't believe this," the agent said. "Ticket pre-sales for the movie have jumped 200% since last night. People are buying tickets specifically to support you." Keanu shook his head in disbelief. "That wasn't the goal." "I know," his agent replied, "but it shows where the public stands." That evening, Jimmy took matters into his own hands. Against network advice, he opened his show with a direct address to the audience. "I need to talk about what happened yesterday," he began, uncharacteristically serious. "I failed as a host and as a person. I allowed network pressure to push me toward questions that I knew crossed a line. I've personally apologized to Keanu, but I want to apologize publicly as well." His honesty struck a chord with viewers. Support poured in for Jimmy's candid admission. The following morning, Keanu's publicist called again. "The network is offering a reshoot, complete creative control. You can discuss whatever you want. They're desperate to fix this." "Not interested," Keanu replied. "But I do have another idea." 1 week later, Keanu appeared on a small, independent podcast known for thoughtful, respectful conversations. For 2 hours, he spoke passionately about his new film, his motorcycle collection, his love of literature, and his charity work. He never mentioned the incident directly, but when asked about setting boundaries, he simply said, "Respect isn't complicated. We all deserve space for the parts of ourselves that are too precious to share." The podcast broke streaming records. Film critics praised the movie on its own merits. And quietly, behind the scenes, several major networks revised their policies on interview questions, explicitly protecting guests' privacy boundaries. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply walking away. Keanu had shown that fame doesn't require sacrificing dignity, and audiences around the world respected him all the more for it. Rhetoric Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.